Canada and Mexico are moving closer than ever. Not quietly. Not slowly. But right when Donald Trump is trying to push them apart. In late 2025, Cameron Mackay, Canada's ambassador to Mexico, said something that almost no one in Washington noticed. Canada and Mexico will need each other more than ever. That was not talk. That was a signal. In February 2026, Canada is sending the largest trade mission in its history to Mexico. Not a routine visit. Not a symbolic handshake. This is Canada sending hundreds of companies, top officials, and real money into Mexico's economy. And it is happening while Trump threatens tariffs, pauses talks, and openly talks about breaking the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement. Instead of backing down, Canada and Mexico are doing the opposite. They are building the deepest partnership they have ever had. Not loud, not emotional. Strategic. This is the story of how Trump's trade pressure pushed two neighbors together. How threats meant to divide ended up creating a stronger alliance. And how the United States may be losing leverage it spent decades building. Because what Canada and Mexico are doing right now is not temporary. It is being built to last. And it starts with a decision made in Mexico City. On September 18, 2025, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney stood next to Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico City. They announced a new comprehensive strategic partnership. The words sounded diplomatic. The meaning was not. For the first time in their 80-year relationship, Canada and Mexico agreed to treat each other as strategic alternatives, not just secondary partners connected through the United States. The plan focused on 4 areas: prosperity, security, inclusion, and sustainability. But the real message was what they did not say. They did not talk about depending on Washington. They did not talk about waiting for stability from the United States. They talked about building a system that works even when America does not. Carney announced immediate actions. A massive trade mission led by Dominic LeBlanc. Funding for joint projects in Mexico focused on migration and fentanyl enforcement. And a clear goal: make North America competitive and resilient, with or without US reliability. The timing matters. This partnership launched deep into Trump's second term. After 25% tariffs. After threats of higher rates. After broken negotiations. After repeated warnings that the trade agreement itself could be torn apart. Canada and Mexico did not wait for Trump to change his mind. They started building around him. And the numbers explain why. Trade between Canada and Mexico has exploded since 1994. From under 5 billion Canadian dollars to over 56 billion by 2024. Mexico is now Canada's third largest trading partner. Canada is a top investor in Mexico, especially in mining, manufacturing, clean energy, and technology. These are not fast trades. These are long supply chains. Once built, they do not disappear. And now something bigger is happening. Canada and Mexico are not just trading more. They are building backup supply chains that reduce dependence on the United States. They are exploring shared production for Asia and Latin America. They are creating port access that lets Mexican goods move through Canada without touching US territory. This is not diversification. This is protection. And in February 2026, Canada is about to lock it in. But that trade mission is not just about business. It is about power before the next big fight begins. In February 2026, Canada sends what it calls the biggest trade mission it has ever done. Hundreds of companies applied. So many that organizers worry they cannot fit everyone. This is not a photo op. This is Canada deploying its full economic machine. The mission targets 6 sectors. Advanced manufacturing, clean energy and clean tech, information and communications technology, agriculture and processed food, agri-tech, creative industries. Canadian firms will go to Mexico City, then to Monterrey or Guadalajara, depending on the sector. They will meet ministers. They will meet local business leaders. They will get briefings from trade officials. And most important, small and mid-sized companies will get direct business meetings designed to create deals fast. This is deliberate. Canada is embedding its companies deep into the Mexican economy at the exact moment Trump is trying to force both countries into submission with tariff threats. And the timing is not random. This mission happens just months before the mandatory review of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement begins in July 2026. By the time Trump tries to renegotiate, Canada will already have hundreds of new business ties in Mexico. Real contracts. Real investments. Real supply chains. Facts on the ground. Canadian businesses are pushing this themselves. Tariffs are squeezing them. Uncertainty is costing them money. And Trump's pressure is doing the opposite of what he wants. Instead of pulling Canada closer to the US, it is pushing Canadian companies to build exits. Mexico is the exit. And once those exits exist, they do not close easily. But to understand why this shift is happening so fast, you have to look at what Trump did to destroy trust first. Before Trump even took office again, he threatened 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He said they would stay until drugs and illegal immigration stopped. In February 2025, he followed through. 25% on almost everything. Canadian energy got 10%. Everything else took the hit. Days later, Trump created chaos by carving out temporary exemptions for goods that met trade agreement rules. Companies rushed to prove compliance. Supply chains were reworked at massive cost. By late summer, most Canadian and Mexican trade was reshaped just to survive. Then Trump escalated again. In July, he announced even higher tariffs. 35% on Canada. 30% on Mexico. Then he paused, then delayed, then froze them again. The uncertainty alone cost billions. Then came October. Trump cut off all trade talks with Canada after an Ontario government ad quoted Ronald Reagan criticizing tariffs. An ad ended negotiations. Throughout all of this, Trump kept repeating the same idea. Let the trade agreement expire. Replace it with separate deals. Negotiate alone, max pressure. The strategy was clear. Divide Canada and Mexico. Force concessions. But the plan was built on a bad assumption. That Canada and Mexico had no choice. That assumption was wrong. Instead of splitting, they moved closer. Instead of waiting, they built alternatives. Instead of reacting, they planned. And now they are redesigning supply chains in ways that reduce US leverage at the core. The next step is the most important one yet. Because it changes how trade moves across the entire continent. The real shift between Canada and Mexico is not about trade volume. It is about control. Mexico wants direct access to Canadian ports. Not as a backup. As a primary route. Mexican leaders have been clear. They want goods to reach Asia without touching US territory. Without US ports. Without US pressure. Canada is listening. Under the Trans-Pacific Partnership, Mexican goods can enter Canada under existing rules. From there, they can ship directly to Asia through Canadian Pacific ports. No US transit. No US tariffs. No last-minute threats. At the same time, Canada wants deeper access to Mexico's market. Not just to sell products. To build them. Canadian firms can make components in Canada, finish assembly in Mexico, then sell across Latin America using Mexico's trade deals. Lower costs, wider access, more control. This is already happening. The auto sector shows it clearly. Cars built in Mexico increasingly use Canadian parts. They meet North American content rules. They can enter the US without tariffs. But they do not have to. Those same vehicles can go south into Latin America, or west into Asia through Canada. Trump thinks tariffs force loyalty. What they really do is force redesign. Canada and Mexico are building a system that still works even if the US becomes unreliable. And once that system exists, it does not disappear when one president leaves office. That is the part Washington is starting to notice. Canada and Mexico have worked together for decades. NAFTA since 1994. CUSMA since 2020. So why is this different? Because before, everything ran through the United States. The US was the hub. Canada and Mexico were spokes. Trade existed, but it was secondary. That structure is changing. This new partnership builds direct systems that do not need US approval. The action plan is bilateral. The trade mission is bilateral. The supply chain planning is bilateral. America is not in the room. Instead of one center of power, North America is becoming three. Canada trades with the US and Mexico. Mexico trades with the US and Canada. And Canada and Mexico trade with each other directly. That matters. Security cooperation shows it too. Fentanyl enforcement, migration, border coordination. Canada and Mexico are working together because it helps them, not because Trump demands it. When Trump threatens tariffs over fentanyl, he assumes only the US can solve the problem. But joint action between Canada and Mexico changes that. This is the scenario US planners fear most. Two large neighbors reducing American leverage at the same time. And it is happening faster because of pressure, not despite it. The February 2026 trade mission is not the end. It is the lock. Because it happens right before the most important negotiation of all. The July review of the trade agreement. And that is where this story turns into a direct showdown. In July 2026, the mandatory review of the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement begins. All three countries must decide what happens next. Extend it, change it, or let it expire. Donald Trump has already made his position clear. He wants major changes. He complains about dairy rules, about lumber, about digital taxes, about everything that limits US leverage. More than that, Trump's team has floated a bigger idea. End the trilateral deal. Replace it with two separate agreements. One with Canada, one with Mexico. That would give the United States maximum pressure over both. That was the plan. But by the time talks begin, the board has changed. Canada and Mexico will arrive after 6 months of deep bilateral work. Hundreds of companies connected. Supply chains already moving. Ports already planned. Investments already committed. They will not show up alone. They will show up aligned. Trump wanted Canada and Mexico to negotiate separately. Instead, they are coordinating. And here is the leverage shift. If Trump threatens to end the agreement, Canada and Mexico can respond together. They can deepen their own partnership. They can keep trade flowing through alternative routes. The United States cannot say the same. Because most American supply chains still depend on Canadian and Mexican inputs. parts, energy, food, manufacturing steps that cannot be replaced quickly. Trump believes the US holds all the cards. But the math says otherwise. And the consequences land directly on American consumers. More than 85% of Canadian trade with the United States moves under trade agreement exemptions. The same is true for Mexico. If the deal collapses, Trump's tariffs hit instantly. Prices jump. Costs rise. Inflation moves fast. Canada and Mexico are preparing for that risk right now. They are building exits. They are building backups. The United States is not. American factories rely on cross-border flows that cannot stop overnight. American consumers rely on prices that cannot absorb sudden tariffs without pain. That is the reality Trump avoids saying out loud. In the long run, Canada and Mexico can adapt. In the short run, the US takes the hit. And that changes the power balance. If current trends continue, North American trade looks very different in 10 years. Canada and Mexico run integrated supply chains in manufacturing, energy, and food. Mexican goods move to Asia through Canadian ports. Canadian firms use Mexico to reach Latin America. The US is still a partner, but no longer the gatekeeper. When Washington threatens tariffs, Ottawa and Mexico City do not panic. They coordinate. This is not speculation. It is already being built. And it is being built because pressure forced it. Trump thought threats would bring submission. Instead, they produced independence. And the final outcome will not depend on who shouts the loudest. It will depend on who built the most durable relationships. What is happening between Canada and Mexico is not theory. It is not a warning. It is construction. Hundreds of Canadian companies are preparing to enter Mexico. Mexican officials are planning logistics that move goods without US control. Ports, factories, routes, contracts. This is the future being built in real time. Canadian firms that once saw Mexico only as cheap labor now see it as a gateway to Latin America, to Asia, to markets beyond US reach. Mexican businesses that once depended almost fully on American buyers are diversifying. Through Canada, through new routes, through shared production. Investment patterns are shifting. Supply chains are being redesigned. Leverage is being redistributed. And none of this stops just because one president leaves office. That is the key point Washington keeps missing. Once companies invest, once routes are built, once systems work without US approval, they stay. Trump believes pressure forces loyalty. History shows pressure creates alternatives. And Canada and Mexico are proving it. Donald Trump threatened 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico. He broke off trade talks over an advertisement. He talked openly about tearing apart the trade agreement that shaped North America for decades. He tried to divide. He tried to dominate. He tried to force submission. What happened instead? Canada sent its trade minister to Mexico City. Canada organized the largest trade mission in its history. Canada and Mexico launched a strategic partnership designed to reduce dependence on the United States. They built supply chains that bypass US infrastructure. They coordinated on security without US direction. They prepared to face negotiations not as isolated targets, but as partners with options. In February, the mission leaves. Hundreds of companies. 6 strategic sectors. Months of preparation. One clear message. North America's future will be shaped by those who build quietly, not those who threaten loudly. Canada is building. Mexico is building. And the structures they are creating will define trade on this continent long after the headlines fade. What do you think? Did Trump's pressure make the US stronger, or did it push Canada and Mexico to build a future without American control?